I think obviously what President Trump does next with regards to Iran is going to be critical. Everybody's keeping a sharp eye on that, and he's kept us very busy over the past few days. And we're getting every day there seems to be fresh news, whether it comes to US military deployments or whether it's a statement from Trump that's softer on Iran. It seems to change. And I think what that tells us possibly is that there are conversations happening in the background diplomatically that may be literally changing the calculation for Trump. On a daily basis. We don't know. I'm just speculating, but I think that's going to be critical. And also the extent to which this internet blackout that the state has imposed on Iran is going to continue and how long we should expect it to last.
Golnar, for so many Americans, particularly of an older vintage, it is the late months of 1979 and the development of the theocracy in Iran. Give us your perspective on where the theocracy is now, the nuances of how it is amended and changed since your tour of duty here. I'm going to call it for a good 6-7 years.
I think the one thing that we always have to bear in mind is that there is a base of support for the regime, and there are different estimates of how big this is. Is it 10 million people, 15 million people, maybe 20, who possibly, I think, do very much genuinely support the idea of an Islamic Republic and the idea of Sharia law forming the basis of Iran's constitution and the idea of having a supreme leader. The problem is that they are by no means anymore the majority of the population. And as a idea, even a philosophical idea, it's a spent force at this stage. It hasn't reformed. It hasn't changed to the extent, in any extent, I would say, where it can kind of offer itself an off-ramp to survival. And I think that's very deliberate because, you just mentioned a generation of Americans who are probably haunted by the hostage crisis. Well, someone like Khamenei, for instance, he's been there from the very beginning. He's been on the front line of the revolution. He knows what it takes to topple a regime because that's what he did with his cohorts with the Shah. And one thing that the Shah did was he did, a year before he fled, offer some concessions and political reforms to people who were asking him to please just open up the political space, take your foot off the gas when it comes to the authoritarian nature of the system. And what happened was, the narrative in hindsight is that decision basically led to the collapse of his system and his downfall. And I think Khamenei knows that very well, and he doesn't want to do the same thing. He has been completely adamant and determined not just to not listen to what moderate voices and Iran's middle class want, but to determinedly tell them that I'm going to double down on the hardline position that I've taken.
Alexis, get one more question in here with Ms. Motevalli.
I want to talk to you just about the economic risk here. The primary, I guess I'd call it economic risk, is that the Strait of Hormuz, which I know Iran has threatened to shut down. If there were a full-scale conflict or a blockade of the strait, is that going to trigger a new era of global inflation?
I think so. Quite possibly. Well, what it will do is it will definitely lead to a spike in oil prices, I would have thought, because the immediate concern there is going to be supply. And I think the best point of reference we have for that kind of situation is possibly the Iran-Iraq war, where we had a tanker war in the Persian Gulf. And we had something very similar recently. We've had that possibly since Trump's withdrawal from the nuclear deal, when tensions really started to escalate quite rapidly between Iran and the United States. And I think, that kind of situation will definitely exacerbate global inflation to an extent. But I don't think that the Iranians would go there at this stage, because if you think about their situation compared to even 2 years ago, right now, in terms of their regional influence and dominance, is very different. You know, we've had Israel come in and
Right.
severely weaken Hezbollah and Hamas. They don't have Bashar al-Assad in Syria anymore. They're a much more isolated force in the region compared to where they were
Right.
even 2 years ago. So the calculation for them on that kind of strategy will be
Right.
different as well.